Okay, hello everyone. We're going to start now on Chapter 6, Culture and Health. And as always, make sure that you understand the learning objectives here. And this is how we will organize the material as we discuss this chapter. So, culture is very important as a determinant of health outcomes, and the textbooks basically describes a number of ways that culture influences our health behaviors. So culture helps to both form and inform our health beliefs. And the text here describes several different ways that culture informs our health beliefs. When we think about health beliefs, this is basically how we perceive our health, how we perceive the origins of good health and the origins of bad health, how to treat or improve our health outcomes, prevention of disease. So these are our health beliefs. And to make this a little more applicable to us, a lot of individuals prefer not to take the flu shot. I myself don't take the flu shot, and it's based upon a family experience of someone having a rare but very severe side effect that basically physically and mentally debilitated that individual, and so they had to relearn very basic tasks such as speaking and walking. And so I have a health belief related to taking the flu shot. And others of you might also have health beliefs related to that or other issues. Second, we can see that culture is an important determinant of our perceptions of illness. For example, what constitutes good health and what constitutes illness, so how we define that may differ. And studies have actually shown that there are differences in how we define illness or good health, differences across rural and urban continuums. So we see that generally urban folk have a much higher ideal of what it means to be healthy and their perceptions of illness when compared to those folks that are living in more rural communities. We can also see that use of health services is linked with culture. For example, if you've grown up in a community that had limited to no access to healthcare facilities, then you might be less likely to or those community members may be less likely to engage in preventative care. And so then over time, this evolves to a cultural norm where prevention isn't really prioritized, not so much because the community doesn't see the value of it, but because they lack the basic infrastructure to even access this prevention. We can also see, for example, in the U.S. that there's been a lot of, when we think about health services use, studies have shown that, for example, some African American groups tend to be more distrusting of healthcare professionals, and therefore females are less likely to get mammograms, and therefore we see higher rates of breast cancer in these individuals because there's lower use of health services because of the historic distrust of the healthcare profession. We can also see that cultures have different views related to health and medical treatment. So how we actually treat different diseases may differ based on culture. For example, The West has been very slow to adopt these complementary and alternative treatments that are available, that are widely used in more Eastern cultures, such as Chinese medicine and Indian cultures here. And so we've been less likely in the United States to adopt these methods, such as acupuncture, yoga, other relaxation techniques, in order to try to manage different illnesses. So when we think about culture, here we need to focus on this area, we can see up here at the top that the text gives us a couple of different definitions of culture, and this concept has evolved over time. So there are many definitions of culture, but one of them is that it's the beliefs and values shared by two or more individuals that shape their behavior. So we can see here this belief and value system that in turn shapes our behaviors, that then ultimately affects our health outcomes. We can then see here as well another more modern take on the concept of culture, and it'll be important for you to understand these definitions. So we can see it's a set of standards or rules shared by members of a society, and again, then the behaviors fall within this range of what the community feels is normative or acceptable. When we think about culture, culture is the way people live. Culture affects everything that we as individuals think, what we do, from how we treat older adults to how we treat medical illnesses, to what we do as children. So we can see that culture is very pervasive and has an impact on every area of our life. And we can see that it operates in these various domains: family, our interactions with other family members and others, our growth and development, how we learn to communicate and our style of communication and the language that we use, religion, politics, so on and so forth. So here when we think about culture, it's also important for us to understand the term society, because oftentimes there are cultures that, again, when we think about the U.S., we have some distinct aspects that we share as a society. So when we think about society, it says here that it's a group of people who occupy a specific locality and share the same cultural traditions. So despite being this melting pot in the United States, we can still see or identify some cultural traits that, again, are similar from coast to coast. When we think about, though, culture and a society, it's important for us to remember that there is heterogeneity within all cultures. So we don't see just one culture fits all. We often see many subcultures within a community. And I'll give an example. I spent several years or a few years in South Africa, and I would say overall South Africans have some cultural values that they share. But from community to community, I saw subcultures where the value system was starkly different. For example, South Africa has the largest population of Indians living outside of India, and they came to South Africa as indentured servants. And so I actually lived within an Indian population, and so their cultural system was starkly different than a community that had a very low percentage of Indians living in that community. I also worked with a professor doing some research with a group that had basically renewed this African indigenous religion. And so basically this was a Zulu group, and so they were going back 100 years and adopting practices that had been practiced again a century ago, and reinvigorating those in today's society. And so they had their own subculture, their own belief system. They didn't believe in shaving their face. They wore different attire. They had specific religious festivals with rules and regulations that they abided by. So again, although South Africa has a some cultural values that are shared across the nation, there are specific subcultures that also reside within that larger superstructure. So let's skip on down here and talk a little bit about health beliefs and practices. So different cultures vary in their perceptions of the body and their views of what illness is, what causes illness, and what should be done about it. So we can see that the causes, the prevention, and the treatment of illness will vary across different cultures. Again, we talked a little bit already about the perception of illness, and that this varies considerably across different cultural groups. Again, when I think back to my time spent in South Africa, particularly with the Ebenezer Baptist Church of Isaiah Shimba, and this was this African religious group that I spent a lot of time with, their perception of illness was quite different. They believed that it had a lot of spiritual origins, that the ancestors were upset with those individuals, and thus that was the reason the individual became sick. We can also see where there are very common illnesses and diseases that oftentimes it becomes normative. So we can see here some of the examples that malaria is so common that people don't see it so much as an illness. It's something that you're going to get. It's unavoidable. So the commonality of how the occurrence of a disease, how common it is, may also affect someone's perception of illness. We can think the same thing here when we think about perception of disease. And we can see here that a definition here for disease, the malfunctioning or maladaptation of biologic and psychophysiologic processes in the individual. And so we see down here, if we scroll down a little bit, that low and middle income countries and more traditional societies often see illness as being caused by factors other than diseases. And we can see here the example of the body being out of balance. We think of yin and yang and hot and cold, that these, again, may have an impact on illness. When I think about perceptions of illness here regionally, it's normative. When we look at data on the state of Tennessee, individuals feel like high blood pressure is normal. So oftentimes it's not treated. Again, it's something that you're going to get and it's unavoidable. So again, that impacts their perception of the illness because it's so commonplace in the community. When we think about diabetes, when I speak to my grandparents about diabetes, I don't say diabetes, I say sugar. And so again, culturally, individuals in our region don't really see diabetes as something that's very serious, despite all the health outcomes and impacts that it can have on an individual. And when we think about the language that we use related to it, that an individual has sugar, well, doesn't connote something that's negative. So again, that has an influence on the person's perception of that disease. We've already talked a little bit about the prevention of illness, but we can see here that many cultures have taboos on things they forbid people to do if they are to stay healthy. And again, they use the example of what not to eat during pregnancy. Also, when I think back to this group that I spent a lot of time with, the Amanazaretha Baptist Church of Isaiah Shimba, for them, again, not spending adequate time giving alms and monies to the ancestors and appeasing those ancestors oftentimes would bring on illness. So for them, one of the mechanisms through which they prevented illness was to attend these festivals and give money to the individuals, to basically the priests of this group. They would give money, again, to appease their ancestors, money or food commodities or other items, again, to try to appease their ancestors. We can also see here that there are a wide array of ritual practices that people undergo to avoid illness. I would frequently see a shaman out on the beach, because the area that I was in was coastal, and they would be doing different incantations and religious rites, again, to try to cleanse individuals of certain illnesses, using chicken bones and blood of animals and other things, again, to try to purify the individual and to appease the ancestors. We talked a little bit about individuals' use of healthcare services, and again, that can be impacted on by the availability that establishes a culture of non-prevention, because the services aren't even available to them, or if they are available, they don't have access to them due to low socioeconomic status. So again, it becomes a culture that doesn't try to prevent disease and illness, because they don't have the means by which to provide that. Oftentimes we see that a lot of people delay treatment because they don't feel that their symptoms are pose that much risk towards them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at these theories on behavior change. I'll talk a little bit about how our perceived risk impacts our behaviors. So let's move on down here. Let's talk a little bit about health behaviors and behavior change, because when we think about this from a public health standpoint, this is what we want to try to impact, are people's health behaviors, and to promote behavior change. Now, things that we can't change are someone's age, their race, their ethnicity, those types of personal characteristics about the individual. But we can change someone's attitudes, their beliefs, and their perceptions of different factors that relate to their health and their health outcomes. And so we call these modifiable factors. And these are the areas that we want to target. Now, it's important for us to remember that the leading causes of death or mortality in low and middle income countries, contrary to what we might believe, these are actually non-communicable diseases: heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, HIV, and pneumonia. Although these two, are communicable, but some of the leading causes are non-communicable in nature. And so we really want to try to address a lot of these risk factors that are similar to those here in the West. Thinking about diet, thinking about tobacco use, sexual practices, sanitation, and things of that nature. There is, I'm not sure if you all have saw the video, but it was very popular on YouTube, but it's a small little boy, I think he was about 3 years old, from Indonesia, and it shows him smoking cigarettes, and he's very talented with his cigarette in his mouth and can do little tricks and things of that nature. But here we have a 3-year-old who's smoking, at the time was smoking 40 cigarettes per day. Now, we may think that this is an anomaly in the community and that we don't really see that otherwise in Indonesia, but statistics show us otherwise, that there's a huge population of children who are using tobacco products, and the families actually think that it's okay for them to use that. So what would precipitate someone's belief that tobacco is safe for a child to use? And this again goes back to our health beliefs and our perceptions of risk and our perceptions of illness. But one grandfather was quoted as saying that it was okay for his grandson, this little 3-year-old, to smoke these cigarettes so long as he drank adequate coffee, and also that the child wasn't actually inhaling, so it was safe for him. And so this is where we can get into health education, and where we can use these health theories, or these theories about behavior change, to try to understand where can we impact on this individual or community's perception about the safety of tobacco use. And if this is an area that you are interested in, tobacco use is a huge problem throughout the world. despite what we've done here in the United States to try to address tobacco policy and promoting more laws and restrictions on its use, other nations don't have these same regulations. So basically the tobacco industry is going in unregulated and really targeting younger individuals, them as the consumers of these tobacco products. So we really want to be the counter voice in public health to try to help them understand why this is unsafe. So let's talk a little bit about how we can improve health behaviors. And there are numerous theories that try to help explain, and we're going to cover just a few, and I want you to be familiar with these because these are very important, especially if public health is a profession that you want to go into. It's important for you to have a basic understanding of how we change behavior. So the first model or theory that we want to look at is the ecological perspective. It has numerous names. It was introduced by a gentleman named Bronhenheimer. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly, but several decades ago, and oftentimes it's called the socio-ecological perspective. And what we understand about health is that it's a dynamic state, and that it's impacted on by various domains, and that as we're impacted by these domains, we make changes to adjust to these impacts. And so we can see here some of the basic premises of the ecological model. Again, are affected by and affect multiple levels of influence. That's our interpersonal, that's our interactions that we have with one another. Also our individual behaviors. Do we practice proper hygiene? Do we eat healthy? Interpersonal factors. How we relate to one another, and the intrapersonal is basically our perception of ourself, our self-efficacy, our coping mechanisms, those type of things. Institutional factors and policy factors, those that have an impact on our ability to navigate, what laws and regulations are there in our community, and then also the community itself, and again that goes back to culture. And we see here that behavior both influences and is influenced by the social environments in which it occurs. And that's what I was talking about, this constant interaction. So if you look up here, we can see in Table 6.3, and it'll be important for you to have a good understanding of these different models, but we see here some of the elements, again, that are impacted on the individual level, intrapersonal, institutional, community, and then the public policy. When we try to change behaviors, we don't just want to focus at the individual level only. We really want to try to target multiple levels, if at all possible. But when we focus on the individual level, once again, we want to influence the ABCs, the attitudes, the beliefs, the knowledge, and those personality characteristics of that individual. That's where we can make an impact. But we also need to look at the wider picture and how the community itself has an impact. So even though you might target an individual, when they go back into that community, there are social norms and standards that again have expend a huge influence on them. So we want to try to target multiple domains at once. It's also important to note that we can get some of our biggest bang for our buck if we focus on these institutional and public policy factors. Once again, think about tobacco legislation. If we can create laws and regulations that establish clear-cut parameters around what organizations can or cannot do, we can make a huge impact on what the culture itself and the individuals themselves have access to. So that's one way for us to look at how we can make an impact. Next, we have the health belief model. This is a very basic model which basically tries to address someone's perceptions on their risk for getting a disease, how they perceive that illness, the benefits of engaging in a behavior that will help prevent that illness, and then also looking at the barriers to those preventative behaviors. So let's look at malaria. Again, if you look at their perception of their likelihood of getting the illness, let's say in sub-Saharan Africa, again, it's normative. Individuals feel that they can't avoid the illness, so their likelihood of getting the illness is quite high. the severity of the illness if they get it. Is that something that they see as severe or not? I'm not sure. We would have to ask. But particularly if they see that the severity of the illness is high, so it'll have a huge impact on their health, then we can target, again, the barriers to engaging in preventative behaviors. So we can look at why are they not engaging in these preventative behaviors, and it may be that we can work on their attitudes towards malaria, letting them know that it's not normal for someone to get malaria, and that there's ways that we can prevent it through mosquito nets, or ridding of water sitting around in old barrels or holes or things of that nature, that we can possibly avoid that, so we can change their attitudes and their beliefs about getting malaria, and by educating them we can increase their self-efficacy. So it's important for us to understand what self-efficacy is here. This is an important definition, and we can see here that self-efficacy looks at whether or not people feel that they could actually carry out the appropriate behavior if they tried. So if an individual feels that they're very likely to get the disease and there's nothing in their mind that they can do to avoid it, then it's going to be very difficult for us to get them to engage in prevention behaviors. But if we can help them understand that it's as simple as using a mosquito net or ridding your community of barrels and other things that catch water and let that stay there and start to attract these mosquitoes, if we can tell them those simple techniques, then again this could increase their self-efficacy and the likelihood that they will try to engage in these behaviors. Next we have the stages of change model, and this was developed several decades ago by some gentlemen named Prochaska and DiClemente. And basically when we think about stages of change, let's go down here to table 6.4. We can see here the different stages: pre-contemplation, contemplation, decision or preparation, action, and then maintenance. If we can find that individuals, when we think about a family dealing with malaria and they're contemplating, what can we do to try to help our children avoid getting malaria, then we can build upon the fact that they're already wanting to try to make a change. They just don't know how to do it. And so we can start to help through some type of intervention or a health education program, provide them with the tools and the resources to help them again to make a decision, to move forward to action, and then on to maintenance. So by that, what that would possibly entail again would be, look, it's as simple as you using mosquito nets at night. So again, we've increased their self-efficacy and helped them to determine that, hey, you know what, I can make a decision and move into action and actually implement these mosquito nets in my home and then continue that over time. And so this is another technique for trying to move individuals across this continuum of behavior change. And then lastly, we have the diffusion of innovations model. And we can see here that an innovation is an ideal, practice, service, or other object that is perceived as new by the individual or group. And again, it could be as simple as a mosquito net or a way to contain water without attracting mosquitoes. And when we think about this diffusion of health innovations, this is a very good model, because again, what we do is we try to target our innovators and our community. You might be familiar with the term as gatekeepers, but these are individuals that have a lot of are charismatic, that have a lot of concern for their community, and again are moving forward the community and trying to progress the community. So if we can tap into those individuals, we can make a huge difference. And we can see here the stages in table 6.5 of this model. Again, recognition of a problem or need, then trying to identify what the specific problem is. Again, develop strategies and materials that are tailored towards that community. Getting that information out, marketing it, again, working through our innovators, our early adopters, to try to promote widespread community change. And then again, looking at those implications, did we make an impact in this community? So these are some of the, just a few of the health models or theories of behavior change that we use. So when we think now about understanding behaviors, it's important for us to be able to understand what are the causes of an individual or a community's behaviors. And this requires careful assessment. So we have to be very intentional and strategic about trying to understand these behaviors. So we want to know, what are people doing? Why are they doing what they do? So what are the underlying motivations? Is what they're doing harmful? And then what would be their likely response to a specific behavior change that we might want to promote? So we can see here again they use the breastfeeding example, and just read through this material here to better understand kind of how we would carry out an assessment. So we would develop specific questions to answer these questions here geared towards the people. So we would ask a women in the community, do you breastfeed? Yes or no. When did you start breastfeeding? At what age was the child? Those types of things. And so that would help us again to understand this behavior of breastfeeding, who it takes place with and who doesn't practice breastfeeding. So it gives us a better idea of how we could encourage breastfeeding throughout the community. So when we think again about changing health behaviors, we go back to this socio-ecological perspective where we want to try to impact several domains. And one technique that we can use is community mobilization. And again, this is like the Diffusions of Health Innovations model, because here we want to try to again mobilize these individuals that will champion this needed change and to promote this change. It's important that when we mobilize a community that it's grassroots oriented, that it speaks to them, that again we have the community's support behind it, and that they then go out and try to recruit or to influence other community members, again, to adopt these changes or to educate them about a specific area of interest. Let's skip down here really quickly and talk about social marketing. That's another way that we can try to promote or try to change these behaviors. And it's based on this premise here that we develop an attractive product that is feasible for the individuals to have access to, that we put it in a place by which individuals frequent, the community frequent, so it gets high visibility, and that we use persuasive promotion to try to, again, brand this product or this behavior change that we want to see the community adopt so that it's appealing to them. And then lastly, I'm just going to talk really quickly here about health education, and this is something that we should be familiar with for those that are public health majors. And we focus a lot on just, again, trying to educate the public about adopting healthier behaviors, such as using mosquito nets or, again, ridding your community of barrels and other things that collect old waters that would have an impact on the community. And oftentimes health behaviors is focused on these risky behaviors. We try to educate people again about sex education, for example, would be one area that we try to address some of these risky behaviors such as unprotected sex and provide individuals with accurate information to counter some of the misnomers that they may believe or inaccurate beliefs that are perpetuated by their culture or their society regarding a specific issue. So when we think about trying to change behaviors, we want to look at these social assessment, and we can see here a definition of a social impact assessment, a process for assessing the social impacts of a planned intervention or event, and for developing strategies for ongoing monitoring and management of those impacts. So social impact assessment includes different processes such as analyzing, monitoring, and managing the intended and unintended consequences of an intervention. Again, this could be a policy, a program, or something of that nature. And so these social assessments are very vital to what we do. So when we think about a social assessment, we can see here that it looks at things that go beyond just health itself. We may look at the community's capacity and its resources when we do these assessments. Oftentimes we go out and blanket the community. We try to talk to important stakeholders in the community. Again, our early adopters, our innovators, our gatekeepers, those individuals that can help us, again, better understand why a certain behavior is taking place, why we see high rates of HIV in a specific community. Our assumption may be that people are having unprotected sex, that is probably the cause, but at the same token, we may find out that there's environmental or structural factors that are increasing the risk. For example, at one time, South Africa had the highest prevalence of HIV. It didn't have the highest number, but the highest percentage of its population that had HIV when compared to any other nation in the world. And a lot of that was perpetuated by apartheid, where the Africans were coming in and working the different mines in the community, and they were not allowed to bring their spouse with them. So we had a lot of males that were in these congregate housing, and they were using lots of prostitutes and other forms of unprotected sex, which was, again, creating a systemic issue where, yes, they were having unprotected sex, but there were factors, environmental factors, that were increasing the likelihood that they would engage in sexual relations outside of their primary partner. So it exacerbated the issue. And a social impact assessment would help us understand this, that there's environmental factors that we need to look at. So when we think about why we conduct these social impact assessments, let's just take a look here briefly and look at Table 6.7. These social impact assessments, again, help us to coordinate the community around a certain issue. We're able to collect information, again, to help us understand what's causing a problem. And then the intervention that we put in place, did it have an impact? Again, by educating the population about mosquito nets, did we see an increased use in mosquito nets in this community? So we would know whether or not our evaluation was successful. And when we think about developing these programs, it's important for us to understand some of the factors that increase our likelihood of success. Again, building on these sound behavioral theories, such as the health belief model or this diffusions of innovation model, that's very important to inform, again, the development of the program that we're going to be using, to make sure that we, again, are inclusive and incorporate those in the community to try to help work on the project. That what we try to assess through our community is what we need to assess, that our plan and our budget is realistic given the limitations of the specific community that we may want to be working in. So those are important for us to have just a basic understanding when we think about, again, how to promote behavior change in communities, and how, again, that interacts with culture. As you finish up this chapter, you'll just want to read through the rest of the material and then look at make it down here to the study questions. So just review these study questions. Again, these would help you as you prepare for your exam.